Welcome. Today we're going to look at the chemical hazards of sodium azide. So first we're going to start with the uses of sodium azide. So sodium azide is found in automobile airbags. Particularly they use sodium azide to detonate or activate the explosives in airbags. We also have chemical preservatives used in hospitals and laboratories, in agriculture, farming. Sodium azide is used for pest control. And of course, other than airbags, we find that sodium azide is used in other detonators and other explosives. Now, here are some properties of sodium azide. So, sodium azide is colorless to a white crystalline solid, and it is odorless, unless, of course, you add water. If you add water, for a short moment, you will have a fishy smell, and of course, it's going to form hydrozoic acid, or HN3. So hydrozoic acid can also be in vapor form, so either liquid or vapor form. And of course, sodium azide, when at very high temperatures, particularly whenever it's under fire, it can decompose into sodium and nitrogen. Now, some common routes of entry for sodium azide or ingestion, inhalation, and absorption. Well, for ingestion, it usually occurs whenever sodium azide is put into water, drinking water, or it contaminates food, and it is ingested either by drinking or eating. And of course, we have inhalation, which happens to be the most deadly. It's whenever it turns into a gas or it is in dust. And of course, absorption, which is probably the most common, particularly because of the use of sodium azide. And that means it can enter the body through skin contact. Now, here are the health effects of sodium azide, particularly the symptoms. So we're going to find the first couple of symptoms are from it being in the dust or a gas, which is coughing and red eyes, and then of course navel irritation. And of course, you have nausea and vomiting, headache, rapid breathing and heart rate, weakness and dizziness. And if you're actually touching it, the original form of sodium azide, the crystalline solids, you can get skin burns and blisters, or from the liquid, you can get, if it absorbs into the skin, you can get skin burns and blisters. And if you get high exposures, the symptoms get a little bit more drastic, a little bit more fatal. You can have convulsions, low blood pressure, possible lung injury that can be permanent, respiratory failure, of course, that would lead to death, and a slow heart rate, which comes common with that respiratory failure. Here are the permissible limits or exposure limits for sodium azide. So these limits are basically for absorption, because skin absorption, that is, because that is the most common exposure. And of course, that is the only exposure that you really want to be allowed, is through absorption. You do not want exposures through inhalation or through ingestion, because those are deadly and fatal. So as an employer, if you will have exposure, you only want it to be skin or absorption through the skin. So here are those exposure limits. So for the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, you have your threshold limit value, which is a ceiling value, which means you do not want the exposure to exceed these limits. So for milligrams per cubic meter, 0.29. And of course, when it is in its the hydrozoic acid form, parts per million, 0.11. Now, you notice for OSHA, the permissible exposure limit, the ceiling permissible exposure limit, you'll notice that it says vacated there, which means that that limit is no longer in regulations. It no longer applies, even though some states will still use these permissible limits, exposure limits. We have milligrams per cubic meters, 0.3, which is in its solid state, and then of course in its liquid state, we have parts per million, 0.1 when it's a hydrozoic acid. And then finally, we have for NIOSH, we have the recommended exposure limit, which is a ceiling recommended exposure limit. Once again, all absorption. We have for the sodium azide solid state, milligrams per cubic meter, 0.3. And of course, in the hydrozoic acid state, we have 0.1 parts per million. Now, of course, there's no permissible limits for the inhalation or ingestion, because those are deadly. Those are fatal. You don't want those to happen on your job sites, right, when they're at work. And then we have now, here are our references. All right, so thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Have a wonderful day.